Birmingham, Sheffield, Newcastle, Cardiff, London, but lots coming in. So keep an eye out for that. And there's no obligation to get involved, but lovely that people can meet in person and meet regionally too. And we're so grateful to the kind of women, the members that are organising those as well. I'm down at Lewes on, if anyone wants to come along and watch football on Sunday, down at Lewes Football Club on Sunday too. So we're in lots of places and it's really nice and people are sharing where they are to meet in person. And draw breath. I did all that in 5 minutes. Okay, so delighted to welcome today for our webinar. And it's two women who have been huge supporters of the Women's Sport Collective for a long, long time. So first of all, Maya Herm from ReloMetrics. And actually, Maya, I think when we first met, but Maya's been a huge fan of ours, I think, of the collective and all that we've done. And she's worked really hard. Initiated some meetups in London, and it's always been this kind of star pupils of the Women's Sport Collective that have always been there championing our cause.
I got an honored.
You get a gold star. And similarly to India Thompson and from We Are Fearless, and they as an organisation have done a huge amount to support us with campaigns and initiatives. So we're grateful to. That's not why they're here. They're here because they're brilliant women working in the commercial world of women's sport. But we're so grateful to them to be sharing content with us today. And at the end, we're going to do questions, sort of Q&A. So if you've got questions as you go through, please feel free to keep sharing in the chat function and share your questions in the chat function, and then we'll take you off of mute, or we'll gather the questions at the end. That was a bit of a rush. We've got lots to get through in this hour. So welcome, and I will pass the floor across to India and Maya.
Great. Okay, we're just going to locate our presentation. There it is. Let's just make sure we've got it. Can everybody see our screen?
Perfect.
Fabulous.
Fantastic.
Amazing. We're happy to be here.
We are delighted to be here. We're a little,
we're buzzed. We're jazzed. We've had a lot of coffee this morning, and we're in the same place to do this. We're excited about it. Great. Well, I'll hand it to India, perhaps to do a brief introduction, and then we can
absolutely
jump right in.
Hi, everyone. My name is India Thompson. I'm Group Account and Women's Sport Director at We Are Fearless. So We Are Fearless, we are a sports entertainment and esports creative agency, and we solve business challenges differently by harnessing the power of psychology and neuroscience. So we look into kind of the values and beliefs of how people feel in order to change how they act, and we'll be talking a little bit about that later on.
Cool.
Maya?
Yeah, I'm Maya Herm. I am the Senior Manager of Customer Success and Strategy at ReloMetrics. We are a sponsorship, analytics, and measurement software. So we look at brand exposure across broadcast, social media, and streaming, and return the value of that in comparison to traditional forms of advertising. So originally, this came about actually because I saw that India was going to speak on sponsorship, and I thought, amazing, you're going to speak on the creative side, but there's an ROI component, right? So I wanted to jump in and say, well, amazing, let's find the overlaps in what you do and what I do, and see what stories we can tell.
Yeah, for sure. So it's hopefully a kind of a good mixture. I think it's a good moment to say that, as we know, the Women's Sports Collective community is very diverse. So, and also this topic is enormous.
Yeah.
So we have taken some insights that we have and that we think will be useful and interesting, but we've tried to kind of position this so it's not just for people in marketing or communications, but then it's not too basic either. So it's somewhere in the middle. So some of the stuff you might know, some of the stuff hopefully will be new, and hopefully all of it will spark a discussion at the very least.
And I think that's what we discussed, as not to reiterate, but to emphasize our thoughts and ideas, we hope are something that, whether you agree, disagree with them, that you can take a learning and or have it inform other thoughts and opinions. We're not positioning ourselves as giving the gospel of women's sport, but giving different viewpoints, within the industry. So we hope that comes across in what we're saying.
Great.
So to reiterate the purpose of today, we wanted to, one, of course, discuss the trends in women's sport and sponsorship that India and I have seen in our respective sectors, talk about those thoughts, share, hopefully, as I said, something new. Again, one of our biggest pieces was we hope this stimulates conversation. So if there are follow-up moments, or if you want to have a conversation with one of us after from today's content, please feel free to reach out. And then I think the core of this, and this also brings us back to the Women's Sport Collective, and I'm such a fangirl of the Women's Sport Collective, for lack of a better term. It's been easily one of the best things I ever joined since I moved to London. But yeah, it's really about how can we all play a role in help driving the path forward across women's sport, but also sport in general, right? And I think everybody has a role, no matter how big or how, whatever that scale.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. Cool. So the things that we know about women's sports, unless you have been hiding under a big old rock. So audiences are growing. We see this almost every week at the moment. We get another world record that's been hit somewhere across the world of audiences attending in person. Visibility is growing. So again, broadcast, we're seeing a lot more women's sports on the main channels, but also across social. There is all sorts of ways in which we are able to now see women's sports in our everyday lives. It's its own unique product. So as we will come on to later, there's always going to be, yeah, but what about the men? But the men do this, the men do that. It doesn't matter. They're over there, we're over here. It's its own unique product. It has got strengths that the men's game doesn't have. And ultimately, we want to be highlighting what it does have and what that uniqueness is. It's in its nascency. So even though some of us have been playing sport for a long time, in terms of the appreciation and the visibility of it on a regional but also a kind of global level, this is really kind of it is in its infancy, and so it's such an exciting time to be able to decide what it's going to look like and carve a path that's very different to the men's. So there are still many parts of the current models that need support.
Yeah, and I just wanted to touch upon this because I think it's important to note, one, we are going to bring in examples that are inside the UK, but also try and draw examples from other parts of the world. Again, noting where India and I are currently located, that's what we'll talk about. But something important to that is within different models of women's sport across the world, there are some infrastructure pieces that we're probably not going to touch upon today or answer, but whether it's grassroots, whether it's do players have the right equipment and pitches and support that they have, I think we can all recognize that there is growth to that on top of what we're talking about today, commercializing and sponsorship within women's sport.
Yeah. Cool. And the commercial proposition of women's sport really is growing. It's undervalued, as we all know, and specifically in sponsorship. Cool. So what does this mean for the industry?
Yeah, I think to echo and kind of synthesize this, bigger audiences, if we're talking about a consumer and brand investment perspective, this means there's more potential consumers for brands of a potentially different demographic than they may have tried to reach before. And these audiences are unique. So to think back to an example of a kind of a similar concept that I worked with Southampton or spoke about with Southampton at a previous event, Southampton has recognized that someone who may be a Southampton women's season ticket holder may not have ever been to a men's match and vice versa. So we're talking about finding out those different audiences, how they interact, and what that means for brands and consumers. Additionally, we alluded to nascency, but there are no rules. It's constantly evolving. If you equate this to a startup, which Karen Carney has called it before, many people have called it that, it's constantly evolving. There's opportunity to change a lot of different things within it, which is exciting. It also can feel disorganized at times, but it remains more nimble than perhaps traditional forms. And then what we still see, and this is also a piece of what we'll talk about, is we're seeing a trend still of lower cost entry points to sponsorship if we are looking in comparison, which we're not going to do the whole time today. But if we think of traditional sports sponsorship opportunities, it is a lower cost entry point to enter women's sponsorship as of now, for better or for worse. With that, as we alluded to, we can't possibly cover everything in sports sponsorship for women's sport. So what we'll cover, India, we'll start with.
So the values and creativity. So as I mentioned, I work for We Are Fearless. We're a creative agency, and we place a very large importance on what consumers audiences have as their core values. So I'd want to talk about how important that is in relation to women's sports sponsorship, and then take a look at just 3 examples of how these values have been turned into some really creative and exciting campaigns, and look a little bit as to where these might go in the future. I will say football has always been my love, my passion. I think therefore it's a little skewed towards football, but we have tried wherever possible to bring in other sports. Again, forgive us, we've only got a certain amount of time. So
yeah, and then we'll segue from there into talking about some data points that we've collated at Relo around ROI on specific campaigns, looking at the WSL and the FIFA World Cup that happened most recently, as well as just talk about what that means for the future of image and media rights for women's sport and female athletes. We'll add some industry members' thoughts, a bit of Q&A. We also may drop some polls in from time to time. So be aware, it's not just two talking heads. We want to engage with you all additionally. Do you want to do a poll right now, or you want to segue straight to it?
I mean, let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's
just
do a
drop
poll.
one in.
We're going to drop one in. So the first question we're going to drop in is about what's most important to you when you see sponsorships in sports. So we'll launch it now, and we'll give it about 15 seconds. So you really need to answer.
Okay.
And Sue, maybe you direct us. If 15 seconds isn't enough, let me know. Okay,
they're coming.
Here we go.
They're coming in.
I like quick, speedy polls. This is good. This is good.
Yeah, speedy polls. We're at 18. I'm going to give 5 more seconds.
Okay.
4, 3, 2,
and a half.
1. We'll click end. We think we got potentially majority.
Yeah.
Okay. So most important to see within sports sponsorship in women's sport. I'm going to share the results. So we're seeing a majority right now. 29% of you have answered that audience consideration, does it fit the team and the fan, is most important.
Yeah.
After that, we see, purpose is the most important.
Yeah,
purpose,
so,
46%. I apologize. So it goes purpose, then audience consideration, then activation, and then finally money and brand prominence.
Super interesting. Okay.
Love it. All right. We can stop sharing, and then we will, I think we have to go back. Now here's where our tech comes in. Okay, I'm going to close that.
Yeah.
We're still with you. Poll has disappeared, and I'm going to hand it over to India.
Fantastic. So I would love to talk a little bit around why are brands aligning with women's sports? And first of all, I'd like to talk about the importance of values. So at We Are Fearless, we look at the importance of values influencing behavior. So essentially, opinions can come and go and be easily influenced. And though we often feel that our decisions are based around our opinions, in fact, research shows that the choices we make are based on something much deeper. So it's a belief and value system. In fact, 90% of the decisions we make are done at a subconscious level. So brands, therefore, that speak to the values of the consumer will be regarded far more favorably than those that don't. And what women's sport serves as is this vehicle for brands to showcase something deeper, something that they stand for, and therefore show this genuine affinity and hopefully get people therefore to consider their product on a subconscious level because of this connection between the core beliefs and values. So we're going to be looking at that, and then we're also going to look at attributes. Now, when it comes to female sports, well, women playing sports, these female sports stars have an accessibility and a humanity that brands can borrow from and do very successfully in sponsorship. So we will also look at that. So in terms of this shared values then, in particular, there are many, but in particular, the importance of making the world a better place, and how at the moment with corporate social responsibility and brands wanting to stand for something, there's a lot of proof, there's a lot of research that shows that brands that have got a purpose are far more successful than those that don't. So one of the biggest values that can be shared between a brand and women's sport is, of course, the desire to make the world a better place and the wider societal issue of female empowerment. You just need to see what's been going on recently post the Women's World Cup final and the up in arms nature of across the world, really, to show how important this is to people, and therefore brands that are able to tap into this idea around female empowerment are definitely going to advance for those who consider that one of their values. Secondly is passion and authenticity. So taking sports back to its roots, like the jumpers for goalposts idea. So one of my favorite memes in the world here is Neymar rolling down, I believe it's the M25. So the idea that men's sports can often they become rather cynical. You know, there is a very bloated fees that they're being paid, and kind of the idea that what's it about? What's it really about? It's about the joy and the passion that comes from playing that sport. So the authenticity of the female players and the passion can certainly be a shared value. In terms of borrowed attributes, so this on a personal level is allowing brands to be essentially more human. So the women's sports players that are even the most famous, such as Alex Morgan here and her lovely family, they ultimately have a feeling of a shared lived experience that their fans and their audiences can relate to. So you don't get the sense that just out of this shot we've got the chauffeur and the Porsche, and that, you know, she is at the top of her game, but she is also a relatable person. So being able to borrow these attributes from these players is really important in brand sponsorship. Also engagement levels, and Maya will come on to talk about this a little bit later on, but even though the audiences for someone such as Alex Morgan may be smaller in terms of Instagram followers, there is a far higher engagement rating, and therefore the trust and the influence that they have due to this relatability is so important and able to be borrowed by brands. So got 3 campaigns I'd like to talk you through, and again I could have mentioned so many, and there are so many different ways in which the sponsorship is being activated in lots of exciting and different ways. However, we will start this first one, which is the campaign Furthering the Cause. So this is Lux and Volleyball South Africa, Changed Angle. So the shared value is really Lux showing that they respect women and that they want to highlight that women need to be seen away from the lens of the male gaze. So the campaign started the conversation about sports media and sexist camera angles. It came from the fact there were 2,500 pictures objectifying women published after the 2021 Olympic Games. So the players wore QR codes on the parts of their body that most often were focused on in this kind of sexist camera angle issue. And the QR codes took them to a page, changed the angle, which talked about their sporting abilities rather than their physical attributes. So what's really significant for me is that Lux as a brand, really, they've got no product that they are pushing here, or even really a brand message. It is simply that they want to help further this cause, and in doing so they are demonstrating Lux's values, and that as we've just talked about is so important for those who've got a similar values, that they want women's sport to be moving away from this male gaze, this lens that we so often see. So in terms of how we could see this developing in the future, so brand campaigns that purely align with the values, but also further the cause. I think this is really important. So it's not just about highlighting what's wrong, but it's about what those brands can then do using their platform to actually make the change. So in this example, Lux created the Change the Angle guidelines. So 6 best practice tips for how to avoid these wrong shots, essentially. So again, it's moving the dial. It's not just saying this is wrong, it's saying this is wrong and this is how we think we can change it. And we definitely see this as a trend going forward in sports sponsorship. The second example, and it's a controversial one, but it is highlighting a comparison head on. So Orange, as many of you know, put out a campaign earlier this year for Les Bleus, and called Bleu Highlights. And the shared value of this was appreciating the quality of the women's game. So for those who don't know it, it's a film that they've used incredibly clever AI to take all the women's players who are doing some of the top quality football, but they put the male French players over the top of them, so it appears to be all male. So you've got Mbappe here scoring a fantastic goal. Now, what I think is the most important about this is this idea of subversion. So you've got the dinosaurs here at the bottom. You may be thinking why. So not everyone who dislikes or thinks women's sport isn't of high quality is a misogynistic dinosaur. you know, you might think they are, but we are preaching to the converted here. We are all on this call because we think women's sport is fantastic. But those who don't, it's not because necessarily they're bad people. They just need to be brought on the journey. So though some people have said they didn't like this, this piece because it directly compares the male and the female game, I actually feel that it serves a real purpose for bringing on the journey those who don't understand the potential of women's sport and the fact that the quality is already there. So yeah, it's definitely an important market that needs to be educated in what women's sport has to offer. And the creative opportunity within this space using AI and the technology is very exciting. So we feel in terms of the future trends, the use of AI and CGI will continue to grow and impress. I think, as we referred to earlier, there's going to be more scope for playful experimentation because there's ultimately less red tape around women's sports, whereas the men's game, there are so many rules and regulations when it comes to communicating it. We just don't have this in the women's game. So it's a lot more opportunity for playful experimentation. And also educating those who are on the fence in terms of the value of women's sports. Yes, we would love to get to a place where we don't need to do this, where we can just have the quality of women's sport being enough of the campaign in itself. However, until we bring everyone else on that journey, I think pieces like this actually have a really important place in sports sponsorship.
I agree.
Thanks, Maya.
Yeah.
That's great. So the final one, creative storytelling. So storytelling in advertising, it is not new, but we really feel that it is being done better than ever before in women's sports. So this really relies on the relationship of the fans to these athletes and to these women. So a couple of examples here. So we've got Chipotle and Nike. So Chipotle, real ingredients for real athletes. So they are the partner of the US men's and women's soccer team. And they've really worked on using these player attributes, that they are relatable, they're likable, they're talented, and they feel a lot more real. And therefore, when they are talking to their consumers, they are able to buy into that, to these attributes. Their high production value and emotional storytelling of Chipotle as well. It also goes to show that there is a real audience for people who have followed these athletes over the course of the last 5-10 years and now have come on that journey with them, and so they're going to be far more in a far stronger place as a sponsor of these teams. Then Nike, never settle, never done. So I'm sure you have all seen this. It's creative storytelling really at its finest, and you're not necessarily going to think it's storytelling, but it just goes to show that you don't need an essay. So it's monuments all over England, and each one of them had a specific reference to the talent of the player. So from Demi Stokes' defence on the Thames barrier, as we can see here, Lauren Hemp was speed, and they used a motorway out of home. So being able to tell just even these short stories of what that player is, what their talent is. And that now enables you to kind of straddle the existing fans who would know that and think, oh, that's really clever, and then just bring those new ones on the journey. So in terms of future trends, we feel the continuation of the long form documentary storytelling, Netflix, but also new media outlets like Together and Just Women's Sports. So being able to tell these stories, obviously Sue and her wonderful Game On is an example of how these longer form pieces of storytelling have got a massive appetite, a massive audience. And so we think these will continue to grow. Leveraging the audience existing trust and connection to the athlete kind of minimizes this risk, therefore, and engagement of the longer form storytelling. So that was a very whistle-stop tour.
That's great.
There will be other points later on that I will interject into with Maya's.
Well, I feel like it's actually a perfect time to do another poll because of the 3 topics you just covered. I think the question of or the poll that we have about would you support a team with a brand that you don't align with, in my opinion, makes a good sense for a poll. Okay, 20-second poll. We're gonna launch it. We're gonna watch for the next 20 seconds. So I think summarizing all of that, what you just said, I feel like this is a great question to ask right now. Would you support a team or property you don't align with? Okay, 10 more seconds. Ooh, we've got a lot of maybe it would depend.
Yeah.
Oh, I should have asked more to this question. That's how I
mean,
feel. I wish it's like, what does it depend on?
yeah.
Oh, maybe it's a follow-up.
Or maybe put in the chat what it would depend on if you want, you know?
I love that.
It could
Okay.
be interactive.
Yeah, let's do it. So, all right. So we're sharing the results, which is 61% said maybe it would depend.
Yeah.
So would you support a team or property with a brand that you don't align with?
Yeah.
Maybe it would depend. I wonder. Okay. If you can drop an idea of what the dependency is
Yeah.
is it in tobacco? Is it whatever? Like, we'd be curious to see that. We can review it at the end. And then we're very close with the yes and the no. 14% yes, 26% no. Okay, great.
Awesome.
All right, we'll jump right ahead then. So we'll talk a bit about the investment and commercial opportunity. So within what Relo does, we do a lot of media value measurement, again, on broadcast, social, and streaming. So what I'll be talking about is some data points that we have collated in regards to the investment from advertisers, or I should say from brands, into sponsorship as an advertising medium, and what we're seeing across women's sport. So just a few commercial trends that we're seeing that India and I both kind of agreed upon here, but unbundling, not uncommon at this stage, but we're seeing more of it. So obviously UEFA split out its rights, but we've also seen most recently Man City sold its naming rights to the women's stadium as Joy Stadium, which is a buggy company. Additionally, again, I've got some pals over at Southampton, so they chose to split out their men's and women's front of shirt. So they went with Starling Bank. Really interesting case study there. Obviously, it's a digital first bank, so no brick and mortars. They were looking for kind of an interesting audience segment through the Southampton women's team. New brands. This is, again, another exciting one. And I guess I could put up way more images as it seems like it comes out more and more. So you see at the top, Stella McCartney and Arsenal. Really interesting overlap. Loved the fashion brand entering. We saw most recently Katie Zellum with Miley, I believe is how you pronounce the nail brand that she's partnered with. In the WNBA, Glossier had a partnership. And then I think it's pronounced Miele. If someone wants to correct me on that, please do. But again, brands that we're seeing perhaps not having great entry points into sports sponsorship before, now seeing the intent around it from an audience perspective.
Yeah.
And then on the right, what I'll speak to now is the impact of social media. So I pulled 3 examples of female athletes with incredible social media followings. So at the top, WPL player Smriti, I believe is how you pronounce it, but correct me again, Smriti Mandana, with 7.9 million followers. Sam Kerr, obviously Chelsea football player, for those of you in London, 1.7, and Alex Morgan, who I believe, if I can move Sue really quickly, is 10.2 followers. Sorry, Sue, you were in the bottom corner. So what I'm calling attention to here is really that growth of female athlete following on social media. And what I would say has been probably a 5 to 10 year change around using it as their own PR platform, due to the fact that traditional mediums were not giving attention to female athletes or female sports, broadcast categories, or I should say broadcast time slots, being very condensed and sold to, again, men's sports traditionally. So less of an opportunity to jump in and get exposure that way, but social media remains the open platform that they can own and really tell their own stories. So with that, I just wanted to touch upon social media engagement, which India also alluded to. So on the left, you'll see I pulled a TikTok video from Ella Toon, What's in Our Kit Bag, which I could watch this between Russo and Tooney time and time again. I thought it was hilarious of what they were going through about, oh my gosh, you have this face wash and I've got this type of brush, and oh, I can't pack my shoes, I'm a terrible packer. Again, going back to the authenticity piece. On the right, you'll see Angel Reese, I believe, from LSU, playing basketball, obviously in the NCAA. Here was an Amazon partnership. So obviously she's got some sponsorship coming in regarding what she's telling her audiences that she's buying for college. And really what I wanted to get at here was the level of engagement that we're seeing in terms of measuring the actual number of likes, shares, comments on social media in women's sport is high. In fact, it can be, and what we're seeing is it can be higher than men's sport. And I think this is what I wanted to call attention to specifically, because right now I did a brief analysis of the recent week and months of UK women's football teams. And that what we're seeing is in comparison to the number of followers to engagements, there is a higher level of engagement or an engagement rate in UK women's football in comparison to men's, as well as other men's sports. And then again, it's actually trending higher than the WNBA. So I looked at a couple of WNBA teams in the US. It's been around for at least 30 years now, roughly. And UK women's football engagement rates are higher currently in the last month and a couple of weeks than WNBA. And I think this is a trend that we've looked at over time as well. So my hypothesis and really what I'm culminating to say here is that more engagement on these platforms, a more engaged fan base, means a higher reach and greater exposure through social media. And I did a bit of research because I think what the ultimate piece of a brand's media buying or planning or advertising purchasing will look like is going to be more digitally driven, because this stat I pulled from a Forbes article saying 37% of consumers say that social networks, social media networks are their biggest source of inspiration for purchasing. So if we're looking at the overall engagement to then the down funnel or that bottom line objective of a brand and sponsorship, which I think we can definitely speak to what you've said around creativity, authenticity, right alignment with brand and property, there is also a bottom line that they have to take care of. And so the thesis that I'm saying is, of the highly engaged audiences of women's sport, the consumption model is actually going to change, in that the actual accessibility to purchasing something is going to come through social media more and more. So sponsorship is going to come through social media more and more.
that it talks to the, as you say, the authenticity, but the trust. Because these players feel like you can relate to them, they're human, you can trust them, and therefore the purchasing will come off the back of that.
So I did a bit of review as well, or I should say we as a company worked with some WSL clubs last season, some championship clubs and National League clubs around measurement for sponsorship, as well as content review. And the first graphic I have on the left here is just saying, it's not just the engagement, but the actual content you're feeding the audiences of women's sport really does matter. So we did a bit of a comparison again. I don't always love comparing to men's sport, but I think in this contextualization of football in the UK, it's at least an audience differentiation, where you'll see here on the left, we're looking at behind the scenes content across the 10 most engaging posts per team, looking again at men's and women's content, and that behind the scene content for women's teams and their audiences drives much more value and engagements than the average plays from game, which I think we typically see across men's teams. So the content on this graph is really saying it's not just the engagements, but what you're actually serving matters. And that content has to match the audience in order to attract new fans and engaging fans.
And it absolutely speaks to what we were talking about earlier in terms of it's the personality of these people. So the behind the scenes is naturally going to seem more engaging and more exciting, because you want to know, like you feel like you're kind of friends with them, and you're like, what do they have in their kit bag? Whereas perhaps some of those fans will be interested in that. They are more interested in the person than necessarily wanting to watch them in that play or in a great play. So it's different.
Getting to know the actual person behind the
100%
in the boots.
Yeah.
The other piece that I wanted to touch on here is just average engagements per post. So this graph is saying essentially how many more times players on these teams or in this league, they're getting more engagements than the actual team accounts themselves. So again, example here being West Ham puts out a post, a West Ham player puts out a post. We're seeing that in the WSL, it's almost 1.5 times more engaging from that player than the content that the team is putting out. So from a social media strategy piece, I'm hoping that some of this is directional towards where to focus and how to draw those fan overlaps. But I think we're going to continue to see players probably leading the charge, and then ideally we're going to see that flow back into team following, team fan engagement on those specific accounts as well. Another example here is just social media in the Women's World Cup. So in terms of marketing spend, and this is ideally from if you are a brand and deciding if you're going to buy an advertisement on a billboard or on TV? How do you determine, you know, is it the right fit and what's the return on investment? So we did some measurement around the Women's World Cup, and what we saw in terms of media value returned was a lot of obviously the kit sponsors getting the most exposure across social media and broadcast. That makes sense. But then you see actually a number of other brands that aren't on kits displaying. So Visa got a lot of visibility through LED exposure, Qatar Airways, Hyundai, McDonald's, et cetera. And I think to answer the question of media value for those that may not be as familiar. So when we talk about media value, we think about if you're looking at a brand on screen at that moment, what does that mean in terms of like the inception of the advertisement, right? So if it's a traditional ad, you know you're watching an ad on TV, but when you're watching a football match, you're getting sort of inundated with branding, perhaps without even realizing it at times. So that's what we're trying to calculate here in terms of how much that branding exposure costs. I did a little bit of quick math here. And so again, I welcome debate on this topic, but I did some research. Visa paid about 20 million this year for the extension of the 2023 calendar rights, including the World Cup sponsorship for the women. With that, and based on what we measured across the top markets on broadcast and the social media, they accrued roughly $30 million. We did this in dollars for their sponsorship into the Women's World Cup. So if I'm Visa and I'm a brand, I'm thinking, well, we actually got $10 million worth of additional advertising reach than our original spend. So when people, I think when we come to the conversation of like, why should I invest in women's sport? Where is it in the scale of reach and things? I think this example is what I'm trying to say, which is there's actually a great ROI and there's a great reach and a great return. And in some cases, you may be getting more than you're actually buying. And I would also say, although they paid 20 million, I did not include the activation budget, which for those of you who may be aware, there's always a piece of actually putting something to plan that costs money. Yeah. So you might be familiar, maybe it's 20 million, another 5 million. So either way, they are netting some additional media value here. So my prediction and oh, this should have said our prediction. We said we were going to update this. It is our prediction, but we did change it. The slides didn't. Okay. Valuing image rights and the synthesis of what the data that I tried to provide here is that valuing those appropriately is going to be increasingly important for female athletes in the upcoming years. And we think engagement rates, so measuring the number of engagements you get to your audience, is going to be increasingly more important for appropriately pricing digital sponsorship and advertising opportunities. Because I think when people think about buying an audience or getting access to 20 million fans on Instagram, it isn't always that 20 million fans are engaging, no matter who that player or audience is, right? So I think being able to measure a bit more about the engagement rate and the IP that then factors into is going to be more important. And this on the right was just an example most recently of Serena Williams and a Michelob Ultra sponsorship. So thinking about what that means, and I'm very curious, obviously, to know how much this cost, but her fans, her engagements, and what that looks like should be factored into the cost of her sponsorship.
Yeah.
Great. So what the future holds, this is a tough one. And I think Indy and I both, and I just want to make sure we're good on time here, 12:43. Great. We'll kind of go through the next segment if we get to I want to make sure you have questions. So if we get to maybe one of the industry ones.
Exactly.
Okay,
you
great.
can always share the new documents.
As well. Super. What the future holds. So asked to look deep into the crystal ball of sponsorship in women's sport. Do you want to take the first?
Yes. So very much increase in brand categories that have never been in sponsorship before. So I think this is happening on the daily at the moment, in terms of also continued unbundling of the rights in clubs, leagues, and competitions. So yeah, the brand categories is a really exciting one. I think tech in particular is coming in hot in the women's space. And I think we'll see a lot more of that. I think not only just as a badging exercise, but we'll be seeing how the integration of that tech to support those players, to support the clubs. So it will almost be a kind of a bit of a shop window of that tech.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I would say after that, we're going to see, I think, unbundling continued, but I think it's not going to be very clear because it still isn't clear for the record. I think some teams are determining, yes, we'll split our front of shirt. some clubs are saying, well, we're going to have a consolidated social media account versus separating it. Like, again, I think of the London Lions, right? They have a London Lions men's social media and a women's, but if I think of Man City, they've got a really consolidated exposure of their one social media account.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that's going to be solved immediately, and it may be an audience-based decision.
I was just about to say that there isn't a one-stop shop for all, and if you don't have enough resource to be able to create what you need just for the women's side, then don't unbundle the right. I think the next two, the first one is we're going to see a drip effect of continued investment, and it's going to be gradual. I was at a conference last week and someone mentioned we shouldn't be looking for such an immediate return. It should be maybe a 7 to 12 year return on some of this commercial investment that we see, and pressurizing women's sport to be immediately at its 30-year mark is a bit unrealistic and perhaps unfair. So making sure we're setting it up for success in that way. I think one question Indy and I debated was, why isn't some of this happening right now? Like, why aren't we seeing, all these brands jumping in, or why aren't we seeing increased investment? I think the point of leadership changes at the top of major companies and CMOs, I think we're also in an era where we're seeing more diverse workforce, a more diverse just set of thought going through different companies. So I think it may be some time, but I think we are going to see leadership changes of major brands and companies, and that will also then change the trajectory of that. And I think also large brands such as Visa, who have obviously been in women's football for a long time now and really led the charge, but them becoming the case studies that then other brands, maybe slightly smaller ones, can take. As this idea kind of permeates through those companies, that women's sport, it does have a good ROI, that I think definitely we will see that drip effect.
You want to take the last one?
So increase in digital innovation and access of consuming women's sport and new commercial opportunities unique to women's sport, so better data. So the increase in digital innovation, as we've talked about, different places that you can see the sport. We've we've got DAZN, who've been creating free to air of the Women's Champions League in football. So I think this is going to be massive. It's going to continue.
I was just going to say on that note, I think it's the most greenfield space, for lack of a better term, because if you think of, there's only so many hours that you can put something on linear broadcast to watch, right? Yet we all have, most of us, I should say, have access to phones and computers and can scroll through on Instagram and say, well, today I want to look at Alessia Russo's Instagram reels. So our choice in consumption is actually sort of infinitely open to digital platforms, whereas the exposure on traditional linear broadcast, again, is there's only so many hours in the day. There's only so many broadcast slots for major sporting events. So that's where I feel like the rubber meets the road of why digital is so much more important to,
and also just the way that people are consuming sports, especially the young generations, that they don't want to watch a whole match, and especially if they're interested in the player rather than the team. It's all of these factors are going to affect where they're watching sports and for how long.
And I think that goes into just the commercial opportunity, which is really exciting. And I think that also means we're going to need better data. We're going to need better measurement. We're going to need better audience data, consumption data, consumer data. So I think we're going to see a lot of that in the future. Sue, I know we're about 12 minutes up. How much time do you want us to leave for questions?
10 minutes or so. I was going to say, I've seen your last lovely slides, and we can share those rather than going through in.
Okay, so the industry notes.
So I kind of like people to have a chance to ask questions.
Let's do 12 minutes of questions. Then we can just share those.
We spoke to some of our friends in the industry, because though we'd love to think that we know everything, we very much don't. So that's what those last few slides are.
And we can send
those around. It's fine.
Cool. Thank you. So thank you so much. I have looked at them, they're wordy, so we'll read those in more detail later. But a few questions coming through there. Great question from Maggie. Maggie, I don't know if you want to take yourself off of mute and ask the question. Maggie Broadbent.
Hello, sorry. Yes, I don't have my video on. I'm kind of in transit at the moment, but I just wanted to talk to something you were mentioning about the I think it was the content that was being served to fans, around social media and that sort of stuff. And I know that the Women's Sports Trust just did a report and wanted to kind of understand a bit about how that compared with the findings that you showed up, which was that obviously people do love the non-match play and the behind the scenes, but are they being served less of it? And would they like to see more? Is there a bit of a disconnect with how much they can find and the ease of finding that content that we might be kind of underserving them?
Yeah,
I mean, that's all right.
Yeah, if the question is the question, do I see a difference in that assumption, or?
Yes. Sorry, trying to go back to think what your slide said.
Maggie's point was actually that the Women's Sport Trust research seems to show that fans of women's sport want more content analysis rather than the story, the narrative, and the background and so on. What do you feel? That's what I took from your question, Maggie.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Totally feel. Well, I would say our data set was perhaps, again, fairly. It was like 15 clubs that we worked with, right? So our data set may not be the scale of what the Women's Sport Trust had, and we also did it last year, so things may have changed quickly. I would say I don't disagree with that. It's probably a mix of, well, we've been over serving them on here are the great stories of, well, over serving, or just we've been serving all these great stories and personal moments for us to get to know the players. But actually the audience is saying, well, we want to see more game content. We want to see this and that. I don't think it's mutually exclusive, I guess. And I wouldn't say. Yeah,
I agree. I think there might be some really interesting thing where fans have evolved a bit more and kind of now they know the athletes and they do still want to see that, because I love all of the Lionesses content. Oh my God, love it.
Yeah. And now we're ready for more content. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool.
No, great point.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Marie, do you want to ask your question, or I can ask for you, whatever you prefer?
Hi there. Hopefully you can hear me. So yeah, I was really interested in your kind of social media insight that you were giving, and we've done a little bit of research into this, and with approaching some female athletes recently, but we found that with a lot of them, the ratio of female to male followers that they have is very heavily kind of swayed towards, like, there'll be 95% followed by men, and unfortunately for the wrong reasons. Are you finding that across the board with kind of the female? I saw a lot of them had a lot of followers. I was just wondering what you were finding with the kind of ratio, if you have that information, of followers they have in terms of gender.
Yeah, I would say we only take what's publicly available. So I wouldn't be able to say specifically to the demographic of each player or team that we saw. So I don't know. We don't have access unless they've authenticated in our platform, which is another topic, but like, we just don't have access to the demographic breakdown. That is interesting. And it would be really interesting if someone could get the Lionesses team to basically share their demographic breakdown. I think I'd be curious to hear that. But I unfortunately would say I don't have the data to back up that thesis from what you're saying.
It's a really interesting one. I think, though, that perhaps so even if they've got say 90% of the followers are men and following for the wrong reasons, that is still, if you were the 10% of the women following, you would hope that they would be the really engaged fans, and that, so if you factored that into your equation in terms of whether they're the right partner, having 10% of really engaged fans might still be better than, like, for instance, going with a male athlete that had a far lower percentage of engaged fans anyway.
Can I ask a question back, actually? Is in your research, how did you get to the thesis that they were following them for the wrong reason, or is that just the general assumption?
We got a bit of a breakdown of the engagement and the kind of the
sentiment.
Okay. Of the analysis behind their account. That was provided to us, but also you could see from the comments, they were all men commenting, and just not nice comments.
Yeah. We should connect then. I'd love to see the overlaps there.
Thank you very much.
I think it's actually a fascinating area as well, isn't it? I think with so much of this, it's almost the beginning of discovering and learning more and so on too. There's a question here, and I don't know if anyone from Sky is here, but I think can comment a little bit on it. Somebody asked about what people felt about the new Sky Sports ad for WSL with the remix of Storms is Shut Up. And the only thing I know is, having spoken to Sky on a couple of meetings, is they absolutely recognise it's not risky, that's true, that they're trying something new and that they are really trying to attract a very different audience. So it's almost as we saw it, not that I shouldn't be judging it, but they're not after 57-year-old women from my background, you know, in terms of who they're trying to attract to the content that they're sharing. So I think it's I don't know if others have seen it, anybody else wants to share their thoughts on it, but sometimes, and I remember thinking that with This Girl Can, the last This Girl Can campaign, thinking, oh, it didn't resonate with me in the same way, but I wasn't really the target audience. And I think that's probably the same for this ad is
That's okay.
Yeah. And provocation, let's be honest, is a fantastic way to get cut through. So
yeah, exactly. I don't know if anybody's got any other thoughts on that. And then a question from Christopher. We've got a couple of men on this call. They've slipped in.
Love it.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
We welcome all.
Christopher just asking, what's the thought about unbundling the social media accounts? And I think this is such a big question. So maybe just in kind of as we come to the end here, but your thoughts on that, because I think you've illustrated different teams, different sports doing it in different ways. What are your thoughts on whether that's the right thing to do or not?
I mean, I think we touched on it already, but I think it depending on if you've got enough resource to be able to actually serve the women's side of things well enough. I think that the issue is doing it because it feels like the right thing to do, and then keeping a balance of sort of 90% to 10% on in terms of the content you're creating, in terms of how often you're speaking on those platforms. So I would say it's a case by case basis. There's definitely a lot to be gained if you are able to kind of fund and resource them.
Yeah, to add on that, I would say it's probably a resources, but also like bottom line objective. Like I was speaking to some people at a club in the north who were like, well, currently at where our women's club is, to that point, we don't have someone to run that channel, but we actually want to bring them into share the club audience. Like some clubs think, well, we're one team, one club, one identity. And I think there's debates on either side of that. So I think it's resources. It's, do they want to have that audience served both things? Are they aware of their audience breakdown for their men's and women's teams? There is a lot to unpack there for sure. But I think,
and this is also the fact that you can, in theory, change the opinion of perhaps people who are fans of the men's team who think women's team aren't that great, aren't worth a watch. That if you're keeping them together, that you get to serve them content that could change their opinion. So it could go either way. Really,
I feel like that's a whole nother webinar, so we can talk about.
Absolutely. We've got people here that are actually doing it for clubs that are commenting too.
Sorry about that.
Exactly. Ooh,
great. Oh, hi, Chris.
I was gonna say.
Excellent. I'm going to thank you. I'm going to wrap up. I will share the rest of the questions. I'm conscious people dropping off now before 1 o'clock, but we're so grateful. You two should have your own podcast or show or YouTube channel. It's a lovely double act of the.
Can I give a shout out to the Women's Sport Collective though? I just want to praise you guys because again, I have never been part of such a collaborative, really thoughtful and kind group of people who just want to help and look out for each other. And that's led by you two. And it's paid so many dividends, not just from a personal level. We're now going to be friends.
We're besties.
But from a business perspective, like I've now made connections that are actually coming 100%. To fruition. So kudos to you guys. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Oh, thank you. What a lovely week we're having. Thank you so much. And thank you for giving the time to put this together and share. We will share the recording of the presentation. We'll share the slides and I'll share the chat as well too. So you can, if people want to follow up with India, they can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, follow us, find us.
We're happy to chat.
Love to talk to people offline as well. I think this is our passion. Well, not I think it is like we read women's sport, and so for us it's not 9 to 5. It's 24/7. Oh my god, shoot me. So yeah, we
might edit that bit off in.
Cut it earlier. No.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody. Have a good rest of week, and we'll see you on an. Oh, I wasn't take a photograph before you go. People.
Yeah. How could we forget? This is
to share. Sorry, whip off your screen. That's it. Come on screen. Nice. Lovely. Let me just get one there.
Oh wait, we got to look at the camera. That's
okay. Oh yeah, you look at that. That's always handy. Oh, we've got other twos. I've moved across. I've got other people that are in double that are two together. That's there you go. Lovely. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks so much. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.